NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins me now from Chicago. Also with me is NBC News Homeland security correspondent Julia Ainsley here on set, and NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hillyard in Doral, Florida. So, Gabe, I'll start with you here. I understand you just took part in a ride-along with some ICE officers there in Chicago. What'd you see?
Hi there, Aaron. Good afternoon. Well, it just wrapped up a short time ago, and this is one of many targeted enforcement operations happening across the city of Chicago throughout the day. At one point, there were 10 teams of 10 or so federal agents fanned out across the city. And this is something that ICE says that it conducts every single day. But over the last few days, ever since President Trump took office, there's been increasingly more of an emphasis placed on them. Now, yesterday, ICE says nationwide it arrested around 1,000 people. And since President Trump took office a week ago, the agency says that it's arrested more than 2,600. Now, what we saw today, we went out with one of those teams. We did witness one arrest, Aaron, but I will say we were out with him for about 5 hours, and it was a very painstaking process. They took them hours of surveillance and also hours of just door knocking in some cases. However, there was one instance where we saw an undocumented immigrant that ICE says they tried to look for yesterday, didn't find him at the address they thought he was at home. But today, however, a surveillance team spotted him at work, and that's when they decided to move in, and he was arrested. We then spoke to him at a processing facility on the outskirts of Chicago. ICE says that he had a lengthy criminal record. The immigrant said that some of those charges may have been dropped, although we verified with ICE that they weren't. But this undocumented immigrant now says that he is leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter here in the U.S., and now he faces deportation back to Mexico, Aaron.
Very detailed account there, Gabe. I appreciate that. I do want to ask you to compare for me, if you can. I know you did an ICE ride-along during the Biden administration as well. Did you notice any differences between these two experiences?
That's right. We went along with ICE for another operation in December after President Trump's re-election, but before he had taken office. In that instance, it was in the outskirts of Boston. During the Biden administration, actually the last month for which data is available, back in September, ICE was averaging nearly 300 arrests per day. Now, during the Trump administration, again, I said that they had more than 1,000 arrests on Sunday. There does seem to be significantly higher numbers when it comes to the number of arrests. And then, as well, Aaron, this administration is definitely putting more of a priority on getting that daily tally out there. Aaron?
And Gabe, before I let you go, I know you also spoke with Border Czar Tom Homan yesterday about these ICE operations. We played a little bit of that earlier. Did he acknowledge that not everyone arrested would fall into the category of violent criminal during these raids?
Certainly, and we've been seeing Trump administration officials saying that more and more over the last few days. They've been acknowledging that collateral arrests, and just so we're clear, Aaron, collateral arrests are when these ICE officers go to and look for one of their targets, but in the process of that, they could run across another undocumented immigrant that perhaps does not have a criminal record, but is either in the same house or in the same vicinity, and that's a collateral arrest. During the Biden administration, there were fewer of those, but I even spoke with ICE officers today, and they say that there will be collateral arrests. And in fact, anyone who is in this country illegally should prepare to be deported. And today, though, we did witness one instance where there were some ICE officers going up to a residence. They did knock on the door and they were let inside. They were looking for an undocumented immigrant. They spoke with what they told us were family members inside. It's not clear whether they were undocumented, but either way, ICE officers had the discretion whether or not to potentially take them into custody. They did not, because the people inside the house were cooperative, Aaron.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez for us in Chicago. Some really great observations there, Gabe. Thank you. I want to turn to Julia Ainsley here now and sort of get into the weeds. I know I can do this with you on some of this and how it all works. Gabe touched on it there, but I wonder what happens in the in-between here. We see the images of people being arrested. We see people being marched onto planes to face deportation. But what happens in between for these migrants?
By and large, most of those people are probably not the same people. As we understand it, a lot of the people, especially those on those military flights, had recently crossed the border. So these aren't people that ICE went to go arrest in the middle of U.S. cities. Those who they're arresting in the cities have to then spend some time in ICE detention, that they're transported somewhere on the border. They may have, in that time, a chance to go before an immigration judge and make a case about why they should be in this country and not deported. It's a long process and it's costly. ICE right now is already looking at a $230 million budget shortfall, and that's under the operations they did under Biden. So as they want to ramp up these arrests, they have to find a place to house them and more planes to deport them.
Well, let's talk about that housing part of this. I mean, they're sending these folks to detention centers for the most part, I would imagine, but eventually, potentially, they could run out of space, right? What happens then?
Yeah, that's right. They're only funded for 41,500 beds, if you want to get into the weeds there. And they want to go to as many as 80,000 or 120,000 beds. So they're working with private prison companies. Those are going to be the big winners from all of this. And they're ramping up space. They're looking at military bases where they could build temporary facilities, basically tent cities to house migrants. None of that comes cheap, and all of that takes time. So it's a question of, when you look at these nationwide enforcements, and we are expecting to see it over the week in other cities as well, how long are they going to be able to sustain that? Because you can arrest someone a lot faster than you can build a building.
Yeah, the arrests have been happening. The repatriation flights happened during the Biden administration, although not on military aircraft. Can you sort of compare for us, I guess, the numbers, as you look at the number of arrests that ICE has made, that ICE made during the Biden administration versus what we're seeing now?
Well, certainly the arrests have gone up. You're looking at 956 on Sunday. That is a very large number. It's the highest of the Trump administration so far, and that would be a big day for the Biden administration. On average in September, that's the latest month we have full public data for, they arrested 282 migrants per day. So that's quite a jump. That's significant. But the deportations in general haven't jumped that much. For example, there have been 4,000 sent back to Mexico. That's very average for a week under the Biden administration, too. So it's a matter of seeing how quickly they can get these people through a pipeline. So we shouldn't just be looking at arrests. We should also be talking about deportations as well. Well,
let's talk about that then. I mean, we saw what happened over the weekend with Colombia. We know that there were some flights that were slowed down with Mexico as well. Is there concern in the administration about other countries perhaps pushing back or not accepting these repatriation flights?
They would probably say there's not concern because of the big diplomatic muscle that President Trump just flexed over the weekend when he posted on X that he was going to impose tariffs on Colombia and restrict visas for people to be able to come to the U.S. legally from Colombia. And so they would say, look, we have no concerns because we'll just put the full pressure on them. But there is an emergency meeting being called this week by leaders of Latin American nations about how they're going to handle this. They may find that they have strength in numbers, that if they start to push back, they might not have as many of these flights. And we should say Colombia didn't have a problem with the fact that there were Colombian nationals being deported back home. Right. They had a problem with the military flights. They thought that was inhumane. Some of these countries also might not realize that migrants have traditionally been in handcuffs and had shackles around their feet when they flew. That's normal. What's different is the military plane, the look of that.
Yeah, it's a cargo plane.
Of course. Yeah. And if they ever get to a point, and they've talked about this, where they'd start to deport nationals to countries they aren't from. For example, if Venezuela continues to refuse to take back Venezuelans, will they then send those people to somewhere like El Salvador? We'll have to see how all that plays out and what kind of diplomatic pressure the administration could apply there.
Okay, I know you're going to hang with us. I want to turn to Vaughn Hillyard, though, in Florida for us today. Vaughn, the White House is essentially declaring a victory in its brief dispute with Colombia, as we've been talking about. Can we expect to see this administration use these threats of tariffs and sanctions and such to sort of strong arm other allies?
Especially with the swiftness in which the Colombian president stood down on the retaliatory tariffs that he had announced just hours after the United States and President Trump announced their own tariffs on Colombian goods coming to the United States. You saw from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt suggests that the days of appeasement are over. You saw people like Florida Senator Rick Scott say there's a new sheriff in town. And frankly, all of this happened less than 1 week of Donald Trump's presidency. And that is where you have seen him repeatedly not only threaten, but in his first administration, he put significant tariffs on Mexico and China, and and goods even coming from the EU. And so that is that outstanding question, because Colombia was not necessarily a country that he was audibly and publicly threatening until literally they turned back these 2 military aircrafts. And that is what caught so many off with surprise, was his quickness to turn to tariffs as a way to try to get Colombia to stand down on their resistance to those flights coming back into Colombia.
So then, Vaughn, is there any concern or conversation at least about these threats of tariffs and such leading to higher prices for Americans here?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at just Colombia specifically, there's a large share of imported coffee in the United States comes from Colombia. It makes up almost majority of the market, but also flowers, a great deal of the flower market. And ahead of Valentine's Day, there was one ally of Donald Trump, Katie Miller, who is also the wife of Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, who posted on social media last night that we'll pay more for coffee and flowers, and said thank you. And essentially, they're willing to make those concessions, and that Americans should understand that if their prices are to increase, that they are doing this as part of a longer-term good. Sorry, as music here is starting here in this room here behind me here.
Yeah, I'm going to take that music as my cue to ask you about where you are and what you're there for. You're at the House Republicans retreat there outside Miami. Help us understand what the plan is there today.
Right. This is actually the room where Speaker Mike Johnson and other House Republican leadership just addressed the press here ahead of President Trump, just about 100 yards from where we're standing right now. He's about to deliver remarks in a ballroom here in Doral at the Trump property. This is the retreat, the annual retreat for the House GOP conference. Ahead of them, essentially kicking things into high gear up on Capitol Hill. They will be here through Wednesday. And I want to let you hear a little bit from Speaker Johnson specifically on the tariff and Colombia issue, because you saw him essentially to every single question stand by the president and defend the, in some cases, controversial moves that he's made. Take a listen.
We will move as necessary on any country. This was a message to Colombia and anyone else. You have to participate. You have to take back the illegals who came here that come from your country. And if not, then we will act. Congress will have no daylight between us and the White House on that issue.
And this is where we expect President Trump in about a half hour from now to take the microphone and address the House GOP conference. And so far, with majorities in the Senate and the House, they understand that this period of legislating is going to be so key, especially under the context that who knows what happens in the 2026 midterms. And so this window of being able to effectively not only pass a major legislative package, but also avoid a government shutdown in March and potentially raise the debt ceiling later on this spring. This is a really important time for not only House Republicans, but also for President Trump as well.
All right, Vaughn Hillyard for us in Florida today. Vaughn, thank you. I want to turn back to Julia Ainsley here. Julia, I know we have some breaking news now on action the Justice Department has taken against some former members of the special counsel Jack Smith's team. What do you know?
Well, we know that people who were on Jack Smith's team, which is now looking like it's being dissolved, that they were detailed from other parts of the Justice Department. So these people are now essentially losing their jobs when they were probably expecting just to go back to their other jobs. And they picked some of the best people from the criminal division, from the civil division, to go investigate how Donald Trump may have meddled in trying to obscure the outcome of the 2020 election and his interference in Georgia, as well as how he handled his classified documents, his documents that were found in Mar-a-Lago. So these are people, they were considered civil servants, cream of the crop, not political appointees. Many of them probably served under the first Trump administration as well. Now they're losing their jobs. And this follows a slew of firings we've seen just over the weekend, the firings of at least 12 inspector generals without giving Congress that 30-day heads up. And then last week, also at the Justice Department, they got rid of the 4 top officials who run immigration courts. Sorry, it comes back to immigration again. But also people who were on the Environmental Natural Resources Division now have to be part of a task force to go after sanctuary cities to try to penalize them for not cooperating with ICE. So this is all part of, a realignment around priorities, but it's different and breaking from norms that other presidents have done in the past, where they generally allow career civil servants to stay in their lane and keep doing their work no matter who's in the White House.
We will keep watching to see what else happens. Julia Ainsley for us. We appreciate it, Julia. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.